Hi, I'm Cesar Santos. Today we're gonna see how 17th and 16th century artists treated the flesh. I'm here at the Frost Art Museum, which is located in Miami, Florida. It's part of Florida International University campus, and I'm really excited because normally they have contemporary art exhibiting here. Miami is known for Art Basel, the Art District Wynwood, and even the museums carry a lot of contemporary art. But they have put together a show with paintings from the Ringling Museum. The show is about archetypal women that shaped some biblical stories. And you know my love for the female figure, for the female portraits. I'm gonna go in there and analyze them in person, walk through the gallery and see how we can detect the technique and the elements used by the masters to control the viewer's emotions. Paintings can be so complicated to break apart and analyze piece by piece, but today let's just focus on the flesh color, how they painted the skin, the human skin. So let's go in there. The representation of the human flesh has gone through many periods throughout history. And we can see that these paintings from the 17th century are still influenced by the invention of Leonardo da Vinci when he invented the darks of the flesh, the shadow part being almost the warm brown color of the background, and the highest chroma is going to be in the center of the form, receiving most of the light. And as the light turns into halftones towards the shadow, they get more of that brown color. Let's keep in mind, as we look for unity within the flesh, the balance between cools and warms and the integrity of each figure and the balance within those colors. Looking at the flesh colors in this painting, we can see that she's being treated with the lighter flesh to give that sense of delicacy, of purity, of indoor work, while the men have been represented with a darker flesh color to give that sense of work in the sun and the punishment, the tough work. So we are already getting hints of the narrative just by the treatment of the flesh colors. Not all women were always represented in this form with the lightest flesh colors. For example, move over here and we can see that also there is a female figure represented with a darker skin tone, and that's also due to have a less dominant effect in the painting. As well as here, look at this. The artist is certainly adding this sense of brightness or more pale colors to the flesh for that purpose of giving the sense of the main character receiving and having this lifestyle. One of the main principles of flesh color is that it has to represent the form, the anatomy, the mass that is covering. So if we look at her flesh, it's every halftone is describing, hinting us of anatomical elements. For instance, we see the arm showing the bicep, having the lightest chroma in the middle, the difference in value between the arm and the torso. You can see how the torso has been darkened, has been pushed a little bit darker to create that sense of distance that is the same complexion, the same flesh, but it's further back. And that's how you create that sense of volume. The hints of colors within the halftones are hints that are around throughout the painting, since nothing can live without an environment. The moment to put these cool colors is in that area between the lights and the shadows. Within a figure, we're gonna have a balance of cools and warms, and some areas in the flesh are gonna have a little bit of that pinkish tone, and the pinks will normally appear in the cheeks, the lips, elbows, fingers, hands, and we're gonna look for those touches of cools and warms. For instance, the cools normally appear in the chest, the torso. Another tendency we see in this period is to avoid excessive details. You want to have the form described where the light is hitting, to have that sense of form and the details and the information to be subordinate to that bigger mass. Even in a darker character with more details, because he is like an older gentleman, so we can have a little bit more of the variety of the wrinkles, of the things that go on within the flesh. Still, there is that balance between the warms and those cool areas. The shadow area is not going to be describing the form as much. The shadows are meant to be flat and even. Let's look at this painting, for example, here. And we see that she has been almost divided in half in terms of light and dark. And the dark area is having less contrast, is having actually the opposite in terms of light and dark. The lightest part will be towards the middle of the form, and as the light goes around the face, it gets a little darker. While in the shadow area, the opposite happens. The reflected light goes towards the end, and it gets darker as it hits that middle part, the front part of the form in shadow. Look for the transition between that light and dark, and the soft edges or sharp edges will describe the form. For instance, the forehead, since it's a bigger area, the transition between the light and the dark is going to be a little bit more in steps, a little bit softer as it goes from light to dark. While maybe in the nose, since that's a quicker change of planes, we're going to have the lightest light and then a quicker transition towards the shadow area. The biggest contrast happens in the area towards us. So the flesh is having that soft transition towards the back contrast with the blouse, and in the front we have the sharper, more contrasty area, the zigzagging of this, creating that sense of distance even from the front part of the chest towards the back. Hands are generally carrying more blood, and that's why we find these areas to carry more of that pink, warmer tones. Look at her hand, for instance. Even with a dark individual, we have to keep that balance happening between cool and warm within that complexion. I like how in this painting, the artist is also talking about how a human being has the two sides to them, the dark side and the light side. And if we look at her actions, we can see that that artist has introduced that sense of darkness as the yin-yang almost happening with her head there, with her face. Interesting. Here we can see a clear exaggeration of the use of the dark masses to represent this flesh color. We can see the skin being really dark in that individual here towards the end. How the artist has really pushed that to the maximum capacity to keep him in that dark area, to not compete with the other character. So if we look at the idea of values in the flesh, we have the main character, secondary, third, and fourth in order, decreasing in that ability to receive the light. For us, it will be quicker to detect who's the main character, who's secondary, who's last, less important. And this is difficult to achieve because you have to change this color so drastically, but at the same time giving the sense that if they all get in the same type of lighting, they will be around the same flesh colors. Her face has been presented with these idealized forms. If we look at her features, for instance, there is not so much difference or contrast between the forehead and the bridge of the nose. And that keeps that elegant, classical feeling. The narrow nose, the mouth being short like that, keeps that sense of idealized beauty. If we squint at the painting, we're gonna see how the whole volume of the head has been described in simple forms. We see the main light running across the center of the face of the form, and as the light turns, as the head turns that way, it gets darker, and the same thing happens as it goes to the other side, towards that ear. So the whole side of the face is gonna be unified, integrated with these halftones, getting cooler and darker as they turn away from the light. Even the nose that is in the middle of the form and has to be subordinate to the bigger mass, you can see that is represented with planes. The front plane of the nose receiving the most light, and then the sides of the nose also imitating that secondary halftone there. Notice that with all these works, the artist is making arbitrary decisions of color, lighting, values, and that's really difficult to achieve as painters if you're just imitating nature or if you're imitating a photograph. Okay, so here, what is the main character doing? Catching the most amount of light. The artist has on purpose created the sense of lighting falling mainly on this main figure, having the secondary figures being subdued, darker, adding more of that atmosphere color to keep them in the background. We can detect areas of warmer, pinker notes. For instance, the hand and the tip of the feet, together with some cooler halftones. If you look closely, the arms have been represented with a darker value, and that is to push it back, to call a little bit less that attention that her torso and her face is receiving. The secondary characters around the main element are the same flesh color, more or less, but they have been represented differently. Look at how she, all the way to the side here, is getting more light, and as they move, they kind of change, almost like notes in music, going from light, darker, less dark, more light, and they all have a different amount of lighting falling on them as well. So we have many systems to represent the human form, from the early Renaissance, using the mixture of complements with the greens and the reds to glaze together to represent the human flesh, all the way to Da Vinci inventing the highest chroma towards the light and the brown going progressively darker as they move around the form, to Rubens' invention of having the shadow side really bright, high chromas in the light as well, and the halftones being really, really gray. Painting the flesh is not a formula, it's a systematic application that you can apply and detect from all these periods of art. Let's wrap this video up. Flesh is not a formula, it plays like an orchestra. I'm glad I got to witness this in Florida.